Nightmare. Invisible Killing by King Boxelian. Chapter 1. Why do we have to do this? Said Dr. Luther. Come on, said Mr. Evan. We're just climbing a normal mountain. Not Mount Everest or something. And when the exercise was over, Dr. Luther said, I am never going to the mountain. And Professor Arm said, oh, please, exercising is good for your health. And Dr. Cool said, right. And Professor Arm said, look, in this newspaper, lots of dying in sleep mysteries were at Rumiskinson town. And Dr. Cool said, I'm planning to go there. And you, Mr. Evan, you said you'll meet your great-grandfather that is now 108 years old. Yeah, 108. He is really old, said Professor Arms. Dr. Luther was still tired and didn't hear a word. And Dr. Cullis slapped Dr. Luther's cheeks. Professor Arms said, I'll go with you. And Dr. Luther said, friends will follow you. And Dr. Cullis said, we got to go tomorrow morning at 3:10. Professor Arms said, then we must sleep at least at 7:45. And Dr. Cullis said, 7:45? That's right now. The next day, they woke up at 2:14 and packed their stuff. Then they were ready. Dr. Luther said, let's go. Professor Arms said, let's go quickly. Chapter 2. Then they went to Rumixon town. The 108-year-old man came and said, hello, I have been waiting for you. And Mr. Evans said, great-grandfather. And Mr. Yuchchind, Mr. Evans' great-grandfather, said, come in and take a break. And Professor Arm said, does he talk like that all the time? Yes, said Mr. Evans. Sometimes I cannot understand him. Then that night, Dr. Luther was sleeping. Then something moved. He could not see it, but he could hear it. Then a sudden strike of blade slashed his body. Then Professor Arms ran into a room. What happened? Then this time a blade was floating in the air. Then the blade moved and stabbed the professor. Then a cold wind blew. Everything was dark. Then Dr. Luther was about to die. But then Mr. Evan ran into the room and said, my, what happened? Then Dr. Close said, no time for that. Dealing with their injuries is first. Then when the healing was over, Professor Arms and Dr. Luther told them the story. How can that be possible? Said Mr. Evan. It is not, said Professor Arms. This is going to get worse. And Dr. Cluss said, this guy is going to end up like the snowman we defeated. And Dr. Luther said, pack your flashlights, we are going to end this tonight. And Dr. Cluss said, this is a ghost? Yes or no, said Mr. Evans. Because it can also be an invisible man, said Dr. Luther. Both the snowman and the invisible man have the word man in them. Can we stop talking about the snowman? Because I still have nightmares of him, said Dr. Cluss. And Professor Arm said, this is our second fight. It'll do no harm. And Dr. Cluss said, maybe we'll get nightmares for this one. Chapter 3. At the next night, the professor woke Dr. Luther, Dr. Kluss, and Mr. Evan at 11:54. And Dr. Luther said, "Go time." When they went out of the house, they heard a scream. Mr. Evan said, "To that house!" They tumbled in the house. They saw a sword in the air. Then suddenly, Professor Arm's senses picked up danger. Then the sword went out of the room and out of the house. Dr. Luther said, "After him!" Then the invisible thing threw up the sword that he was holding. Dr. Kluss said, "Where did it go?" "I don't know," said Professor Arms. Then Dr. Luther said, "It is not a clever thing to stay here. It is 12:38. And Dr. Luther, Professor Arms, and Mr. Evan, and Dr. Kluss went home. Dr. Kluss was thinking, it was impossible to catch this thing. And Mr. Evan said, "If we spray water or something, we'll be able to see him." Professor Arms said, "It might work." Then Mr. Evans said, "There are 98 houses in this town, and 49 houses were attacked." "Wait," said Professor Arms. "We are 713-0909-50. We're the next target," said Mr. Evan. Then Dr. Kluss heard a snore. Dr. Luther and Professor Arms was sleeping. And Mr. Evan fell asleep. So did the doctor. Then the door slightly opened at 1:24. Then the door opened. A floating blade was at the open door. Then an alarm rang. Dr. Luther heard it. And then the doctor saw the invisible man ran to the woods. Dr. Luther followed the invisible man. Then the doctor went in the woods. It was cold and dark. Then the invisible man ran to Dr. Luther and stabbed him on the back. Blood ran down from Dr. Luther, but the invisible man ran to Dr. Luther and tried to cut Dr. Luther's neck. But Dr. Luther acted fast. He slipped out of the invisible man's grasp, but still leave a scratch. And Dr. Luther ran to home and unlocked the door. Then, Chapter 5. Dr. Luther's eyes shot open. It was a dream, but he recognized a scratch on his neck. And Dr. Luther tried to get up, but he couldn't. Then Dr. Kluss woke up and said, "It is 2:45. Then Dr. Luther noticed that he was injured. But then Professor Arms said, "Wake up, Mr. Evan." Mr. Evan was not awake all yet. But Dr. Luther said it was real. And Professor Arms said, "What?" "The things I saw and the things that happened in the dream. It means," Mr. Evans said, "the invisible man came to our house." And Dr. Kluss said, "Then what do we do now?" The room was silent for a moment. Then Dr. Kluss said, "Any plans?" And Professor Arms said, "The invisible man attacked us, and our address is 713-0909-50. And the house before was 713-0909-49, said Mr. Evan. And Dr. Luther said, "Tonight, the invisible man will attack the house with the address 717-0909-51. We'll set up a trap." And Professor Arms said, "That won't work. We have to warn that house." And then Dr. Luther said, "I can't go with you now." "Yes," said Dr. Kluss. "He is hurt." Dr. Cluss said, so as, no, said Mr. Evan. We need to rest too. We can't just be like cats that hasn't eaten for 98 days and trying to rescue someone, said Mr. Evan. The next day, they went to the near city. Sax, the biggest city in their country. They went in the woods. When they were walking, they noticed that Dr. Luther was not there. Then Dr. Cluss and Professor Arm said, Mr. Evan? Then Mr. Evan said, yes? And Professor Arm said, oh, thank goodness. Right, Mr. Evan? There was no answer. And Professor Arm said, these guys are playing a trick? Then a invisible blade swooped the air, and Professor Arm said, the invisible man! And took out a blade of his own. They fight with swords. Then the invisible man tried to take the 57-year-old Professor Arms. But Professor Arms said, I worked as an army when I was 45. Then the professor easily took off the invisible man, and the invisible man shot a gun, and the bullet smashed the professor. Chapter 6. Professor Arms opened his eyes. They were in a hospital. Then a nurse came and said, are you okay now? Then Professor Arms said, yes, but where's Dr. Luther and Mr. Evan and Dr. Cluss? Dr. Cluss is in room 46, and Dr. Luther is on room 94, and Mr. Evan is at room 12, said the nurse. And Professor Arms said, okay, I am better now, and leaped out of bed and said, can you give me back my clothes? Yes. Your clothes are in box 747. Dr. Cluss said, not well. And Dr. Cluss is not well yet. Dr. Cluss's clothes are in box 567, and Dr. Luther's clothes are in box 234, and Mr. Evans' clothes are in box 945. Professor Arms dressed up and took the boxes 747, 567, 234 to Dr. Luther. Dr. Cluss said, and Mr. Evan. Then they said, how long have we been here? Well, 3 days, said the nurse. And Dr. Cluss said, how much is it? $875, said the nurse. And Dr. Cluss paid the money and said, oh no, we've been here for 3 days. It's not good. The invisible man. Then Dr. Luther said, now what? Dr. Cluss said, we have to go home because it is almost night. And they took a train and went home. It was midnight. There was a dark mist in the air. Then they noticed that the poster was in front of them. It said these words. The house is 713-0909-1 to house 713-0909. 67 houses, people died. The house 713-0909. 68 is the house that is only unharmed. And Dr. Cluss said, there lives Mr. Keelue. Then Mr. Yunkel said, where were you 4 guys? Oh, great grandfather, said Mr. Evan. Grandfather, stay in the house and never open the door. Lock the door tight. We will go to stop the invisible man, said Mr. Evan. Chapter 7. Professor Alm said, "It is 1:24, the time that Dr. Luther was attacked." Then a tree branch snapped. It was dark, so they couldn't see anything. Then they went to Mr. Keelew's house. Then Tinkle showed up. The moon shone. They saw the shining blade and gun in the air. They were hiding so the Invisible Man did not see them. Then when the Invisible Man started to open the door, a heavy jug fell to the Invisible Man's head. Then Dr. Luther started sword fighting with the Invisible Man. Then Dr. Kluss ran and tied a rope to the Invisible Man's legs. They could see the legs because the Invisible Man was wet. Then Professor Alms took the gun, and Dr. Luther slid back and took the sword. The Invisible Man was trapped. Chapter 8. Dr. Luther said, "How's that?" Then the Invisible Man said, "You have got me, but if you kill..." Slice! Dr. Luther said, "That's it." Professor M said, "What did you do?" Red fresh blood came out from the Invisible Man's neck. Dr. Luther said, "What has to be done?" Then the Invisible Man said his last word, "You might have killed me, but you can never kill the terror." Then the Invisible Man died. "What is the terror?" whispered Mr. Evan to himself. Professor Alm said, "Mr. Evan, did you bring your great-grandmother's journal?" "Yes," said Mr. Evan. And Mr. Evan took out the Journal of Monsters. There it was. Mr. Evan read it aloud. "The Invisible Man's real name is Thurbanimdus. If the Thurbanimdus dies, his father, the Terror, will awake. Its name is Defigjalk. It is the giant monster that can destroy cities. Its one weakness is you must make the Defigjalk eat salt. The monster will melt if you do it." Dr. Luther said, "But it is not here." "According to the journal, the terror would be here now," said Dr. Luther. "You're right," said Dr. Kluss. Then a massive sound roared in the air. Chapter 9. Professor Alm said, "What is this roar?" Mr. Evans said, "The terror." Then Dr. Luther went out of the house and saw the gigantic beast. The terror, was black and had a face of a demigorgon and had no eyes. It had 2 rows of teeth that was sharper than the sharpest sword in the world. It had narrow arms and sharp fingernails that was stronger than steel. And his body was a snake, and it was about 50 meters, and started destroying the houses. Then the terror saw a plane and headed to destroy the plane and the 500 people in it. Chapter 10. Dr. Kluss said, "No," and got a crushing machine and smashed the monster down. And the terror missed the plane. And the terror turned to Dr. Kluss. Professor Alm said, "Don't just stand there, run!" Dr. Kluss ran and hid behind a house. Then Dr. and Mr. Evan got a bunch of Himalayan salt, then threw it to the monster. The monster did not eat the salt. Then Mr. Evans said, "We need more salt." Dr. Luther said, "Seriously?" and got dynamite. And attached a pack of salt and threw it. The monster was fast and grabbed the dynamite and threw it to the house that Dr. Cluss was hiding. Professor Arm said no and acted fast and took Dr. Cluss away from the house. Then the time went off and the dynamite exploded. When the ashes settled down, the monster was gone. Mr. Evans said, "Where did the monster, or should I say the terror, go?" Then the ground exploded and the terror was towering over them. Professor Arm said, "We need weapons." And Dr. Luther said, "No, we need a better plan." Then the terror came and snatched Mr. Evan, and tried to eat Mr. Evan. Then Dr. Luther said, "This is bad." And Professor Arms said, "Get off him!" And he shot a 3D gun at the monster. Then the terror came down and grabbed Dr. Luther. Dr. Luther was gone into the mouth of the terror. Chapter 11. Professor Arms fall down. Dr. Cluss said, "Dr. Luther is gone forever." Mr. Evans said, "We will avenge you, Dr. Luther." And Professor Arms said, Dr. Cluss, I want revenge on that terror guy." Then Dr. Luther said, "I got a helicopter." Mr. Evans said, "I can fly a helicopter." And then Mr. Evans got lots of salt and sprayed the salt into terror. But Mr. Evans ran out of salt and the terror smashed the whole helicopter. Mr. Evans fell down and fainted. Dr. Cluss said, "This is not good. Dr. Luther has been eaten and Mr. Evans has fainted." Professor Arms woke up the mister. But Mr. Evans was too hurt to move. And Professor Arms said, "How many salt is left?" "A few bags," said Dr. Cluss. Then the terror went for Mr. Evans. Then Professor Arms said, "Not anymore," and threw a bag of salt. Then the terror ran about a few feet away. Then Dr. Cluss said, "3 bags left." Then the terror was gone. Dr. Cluss said, "Look around, it could pop out of anywhere and anytime." And the terror came under them. The 2 bags were all torn up. And Professor Arms said, "That is it." Then jumped up and went in with the salt and jumped into the mouth of the terror. Then with a hot energy, the terror exploded in a globbery boom. Then 2 familiar people came out from the glob. It was Dr. Luther and Professor Arms, and they all went home to see Mr. Ewing Huckgen. The end. Collect these nightmares. Nightmare number 1, Winter of the Terrible Snowman. Nightmare number 2, Invisible Killing. Both available in audiobook.